The day began with an unusual stillness inside the massive hall of the Galaxy Council. Delegates from dozens of worlds moved quietly to their places, whispering among themselves, each aware that something important was about to happen. The humans had arrived earlier than expected, walking with steady confidence, but without any display of arrogance. They were known for their calm approach, their talent for solving problems, and their ability to stay composed when everyone else struggled. Their lead envoy, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a steady expression, took his seat at the center of the human delegation. He had the look of someone who had spent years listening carefully, observing silently, and choosing his words only when necessary. Many respected him for that. Others feared what his silence meant. The peace talks were supposed to be simple, at least on paper. Several border systems had reported small disputes involving trade routes and shared patrol zones. Normally, such issues were solved quietly, but this time the disagreements had grown too large. The Council believed humans could help bring stability. After all, humans had earned a reputation for calming heated arguments and bringing fresh solutions. They had helped resolve conflicts before, and their presence usually encouraged other species to cooperate. But today, something felt different. Even before the meeting started, the humans sensed tension in the air, as if the room itself knew something was off. They exchanged glances, quietly but clearly picking up signs that didn't match the friendly tone in the Council's official invitation. When the Council speaker finally entered, the hall rose in respectful silence. The speaker greeted every delegation with a polite nod, then turned to the humans with a smile that felt a little too rehearsed. The humans noticed it instantly. They didn't say anything, but their expressions shifted slightly, enough to show they were paying extra attention. The first few minutes of the meeting were filled with formalities, summaries, introductions, updates from smaller worlds. Everything seemed normal, but the humans noticed that some council members avoided looking in their direction. Others looked at them too often, as if waiting for a particular reaction. It wasn't hostility exactly. It was something more complicated. Like the council was hiding a plan behind a friendly mask. When the main discussion began, the speaker brought up a proposal, one that none of the humans had seen in the early drafts shared with them. The new version suggested placing several human colonies under temporary external oversight. The words sounded harmless at first, but the meaning was clear. Humans would lose control over their own territories. The human delegation exchanged quiet glances again. They were trained to stay composed, but even they couldn't hide the small flicker of surprise. This proposal didn't match the tone of the meeting. It didn't match the promises made earlier, and it certainly didn't match the idea of peace talks. The lead envoy leaned forward slightly. His voice remained calm, steady, and polite as always. He asked why this new detail had never been discussed before. He asked who added it. He asked what problem it was trying to solve. The speaker avoided answering directly. Instead, he spoke in long, vague sentences about maintaining balance and preventing future complications. Other council members joined in, repeating similar words, all sounding rehearsed. None of them gave a real explanation. The humans listened carefully, their expressions slowly turning serious. They had come to the talks expecting honesty and fairness. What they were hearing now felt like a subtle attempt to push them into agreeing to something that would weaken Earth's future. The humans were not known for reacting emotionally during negotiations, but they valued honesty above all. And right now, honesty was missing. One of the human advisors whispered to the lead envoy, pointing out inconsistencies in the discussion. Another handed him a data tablet showing newly detected patterns of activity, suggesting the council had been preparing this proposal for much longer than they claimed. It was becoming clear that the council hadn't invited the humans to mediate. They had invited them to pressure them. The envoy continued to question the council, still calm, still respectful, but with sharper clarity. He asked why humans were being singled out. He asked why their colonies were being treated as unstable when the evidence showed otherwise. He asked why no other species faced similar oversight demands. Again, no direct answers came. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. A few looked down, refusing to meet the humans' eyes. It was clear that some members of the council disagreed with the proposal, but were too intimidated to speak up. Others seemed worried, not because of the humans' questions, but because their secret strategy was falling apart. The humans were seeing through everything. As the discussion grew more tense, the speaker tried to move ahead. He pushed for a quick vote, framing the proposal as a simple administrative step. He acted as if the humans were overreacting, as if the issue was minor. But everyone in the room knew what it really meant. The council wanted control over human expansion, human influence, and human progress. The lead envoy raised one hand, signaling he wanted the floor. The room fell silent. Even those who had been whispering stopped. The humans rarely demanded attention, but when they did, everyone listened. He spoke with a calm tone that still managed to shake the atmosphere. He explained that peace cannot exist when truth is hidden. He explained that cooperation must be built on trust, not pressure. He explained that humanity came to help, not to be cornered. His final words were simple, and yet they landed on the room like a single stone dropped into a still lake, sending ripples everywhere. Peace cannot exist where truth is absent. Those words echoed through the hall. Delegates who had been quietly supporting the proposal looked away, unable to meet the humans' gaze. Others felt a strange mix of shame and fear. Not fear of violence. Humans had made no threats. It was fear of moral clarity. Fear of what it meant when the humans could see through them so easily. The council speaker tried to recover, but the moment had already shifted. The humans were no longer simply participants in the discussion. They had become the calm center of the room, holding the moral high ground. But despite their composure, the humans already knew one thing. This meeting was no longer about peace. It was about manipulation. The humans realized that they were being led into a trap of political pressure. And the more they observed, the more they understood that the council had never intended for today's meeting to be fair. Quietly, the envoy tapped the table twice, a prearranged signal to his team. The human delegation straightened in their seats. Their movements were small and subtle, but they carried weight. They were preparing for a decision no one expected. The council still believed they had the upper hand. They didn't know that the humans were about to walk away. The moment everything broke did not begin with shouting or dramatic gestures. It began with something much quieter, an uncomfortable stillness that settled over the entire council hall. Everyone felt it, even the delegates who pretended not to notice. The humans certainly felt it. They had spent years studying body language, patterns, and the subtle cues that revealed more truth than any speech could. And right now, every small sign pointed to the same thing. The council was pushing them toward a corner they never agreed to stand in. The speaker, sensing the room slipping away, cleared his throat and tried to regain control. His voice carried the usual smooth, diplomatic tone, but underneath it, there was something strained. He announced once again that the council's proposal was for the good of stability and insisted should be accepted quickly. He spoke as if the matter was simple, as if humans were being overly cautious. But the humans knew better. They had read the details, seen the timing, and felt the pressure hidden between the lines. The lead human envoy looked around the room. He didn't raise his voice or show irritation. Instead, he asked, in a calm and respectful tone, why the council was rushing the vote when the proposal affected millions of lives. It was a reasonable question one any fair group would answer clearly. But instead of giving a real explanation, several council members began talking at once, using long, complicated sentences that circled around the issue without touching. The humans listened, but their expressions grew firmer. They recognized what was happening. The council was trying to bury the truth under layers of fancy words. The envoy let them speak, then asked again, in even simpler terms this time, why human colonies were being placed under external oversight when there was no sign of trouble in those regions. He asked why no other species had been given the same requirement. This time, the speaker paused. It was only a second, but it revealed everything. He hadn't expected humans to question the proposal so directly. He forced a smile and repeated the same vague reasoning, hoping they would let it slide. They DIDN single quotes T.1 of the human advisors leaned toward the envoy and whispered something quietly. The envoy nodded, then placed both hands on the table. This wasn't for show. It was simply the way he steadied himself when preparing to speak with clarity. His voice stayed calm, but it carried a firmness that made even the distant delegates turn their heads. He stated that the humans could not accept a proposal built on unclear motives. He reminded the council that true cooperation required transparency. His words weren't aggressive, they were honest. But honesty can be more powerful than anger, and right now, that honesty was exposing cracks in the council's plan. The speaker's expression tightened. He insisted that the council had full authority to act for the safety of the galaxy. He presented it as a final word, as if that alone should convince the humans to agree. But authority isn't the same as fairness. And the humans understood that well. Several council members exchanged nervous looks. They knew the humans were right, but they were trapped between their conscience and their loyalty to the speaker. The tension grew heavier, filling the room like a slow-moving storm. Some delegates shifted in their seats. Others crossed their arms, unsure whether to support the humans or stay silent. A few looked down at their data screens, pretending to study documents just to avoid making eye contact. Then, in a move that surprised nearly everyone, the speaker announced that the vote would proceed immediately. He didn't ask if anyone needed more time. He didn't ask if the humans had final comments. He simply pushed forward, as if forcing the process through sheer speed. The humans looked at each other. That was the moment everything clicked into place. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an accidental oversight. It wasn't a rushed meeting. It was deliberate. The council had planned to pressure them from the start, hoping humans would feel cornered and agree, just to keep the peace. But humans did not agree to things simply because they were cornered. They valued fairness too much. The envoy asked once more for the council to reconsider rushing the vote. This time, his tone was even calmer than before, almost too calm. The speaker quickly dismissed the request, stating that hesitation would delay progress. When the envoy asked what kind of progress he meant, the speaker looked away. That was the breaking point. The human delegation realized the talks weren't talks at all. They were a performance, a carefully staged attempt to make humans appear agreeable while stripping away their autonomy behind the scenes. No matter how calmly the humans handled it, the outcome had been decided long before they arrived. Envoy took a breath. Not a dramatic one, just a steady breath of someone who had reached a decision with clarity, not emotion. He looked at each member of his team. They all understood without needing to hear a word. They stood. The movement was gentle, almost silent, but it echoed louder than any shout could have. Delegates across the hall turned to watch, confused and stunned. Humans rarely made sudden moves. In political settings, they preferred patience, careful thought, and long discussions. So when they rose together, it meant something important. It meant something irreversible. The envoy spoke again, his voice steady and respectful. He thanked the council for the invitation. He acknowledged the importance of peace. He reminded them that Earth had always supported cooperation and dialogue. But then he said something that made the entire hall freeze. He said that humans did not participate in processes built on hidden agendas. He said that trust could not survive in a place where truth was bent to fit political goals. He said that humanity would not allow itself to be used to support decisions that were made without fairness. There was no anger in his voice, no threat, no accusation. And yet, those calm words were more powerful than any emotional speech could ever be. The council speaker tried to interrupt, insisting that the humans were misunderstanding the situation. But the envoy lifted one hand, not rudely, just enough to indicate that he was still speaking. Even the speaker fell silent. The authority in the envoy's tone wasn't aggressive. It was earned. He explained, clearly and simply, that the human delegation was withdrawing from the talks. They would not be part of the vote. They would not endorse any proposal that treated them as a problem instead of a partner. They would return to Earth immediately to review the situation and decide their next steps. Gasps filled the hall, followed by a wave of whispers. Delegates leaned toward each other, trying to confirm what they had just heard. Some were shocked. Others, secretly, felt relieved that someone finally stood up against the council's pressure. A few looked deeply worried, not because they feared retaliation from humans, but because they realized what the withdrawal meant for the galaxy. The balance of power had shifted in a single moment. Without a single raised voice, the speaker tried to regain control, insisting that the humans were acting too quickly. But the humans didn't argue. They didn't defend. They didn't explain further. They simply gathered their documents, activated their communication devices, and prepared to leave the hall with calm dignity. Their quiet exit was more powerful than any dramatic confrontation could have been. Delegates watched them walk away, and many of them understood something important. When humans withdrew, it wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of conviction. Outside the hall, as they moved through the long corridor toward their transport platform, the humans remained silent. They didn't need to discuss what had just happened. They had made the only choice that respected their principles. Inside the council chamber, however, the silence was growing heavier. Years of old habits, political games, and unspoken assumptions had just been challenged. The council had pushed too far, assuming humans would bend. Instead, humans walked out without anger, without fuss, and without fear. For the first time in a long while, the council realized they had misread humanity. They had mistaken calm for weakness. They had mistaken patience for obedience. They had mistaken cooperation for submission. And now, the galaxy would feel the consequences of that mistake. Shockwaves began spreading through the galaxy almost the moment the humans stepped out of the council hall. The delegates left inside sat frozen for several seconds, unsure how to respond. They had expected humans to argue or negotiate, or at least request more time. But no one had imagined they would walk away so calmly, leaving the council with no chance to repair the moment. It didn't take long for the news to escape the walls of the chamber. Assistants whispered updates into communication devices. Advisors rushed to their superiors. Journalists waiting outside the building sensed something unusual and quickly surrounded delegates walking out. Even though no one had all the details, one message spread faster than any official statement. The humans left. They didn't accept the council's plan. Within hours, hundreds of news platforms across the galaxy were discussing the withdrawal. Some tried to soften the story, suggesting a misunderstanding or a delay. Others reported the truth more directly, that the humans had walked out because the council pushed a proposal without transparency. But the most powerful image repeated. Everywhere was simple. The empty seats of the human delegation, still neatly arranged as if waiting for people who had no intention of returning. Across many worlds, people paused what they were doing to watch. It wasn't just curiosity. Humans had earned respect over the years for being steady, patient, and fair. If they walked away from the talks, it meant something serious had happened. In places where citizens had felt the weight of the councils decisions for years, the reaction was even stronger. Some communities, long frustrated with the council's lack of fairness, felt hope for the first time in a long while. They whispered to each other in marketplaces, transport stations, and open-air assemblies. If the humans can stand up to the council, maybe we can too. The council didn't expect this reaction, not from other species, and certainly not from their own member worlds. They had assumed humans were just another powerful group who would comply when pressured. But the quiet exit had done something the council hadn't predicted. It exposed a weakness. Not a weakness of force or military power, but of credibility. Credibility, once broken, spreads like cracks in glass. Inside the council headquarters, discussions turned chaotic. Some members blamed the speaker. Others blamed the humans. Some argued that the proposal should never have been introduced. Others insisted they should double down and call the humans unreasonable. But everyone knew the truth, even if they didn't say it. The council had been caught manipulating the process. As the council scrambled, a new wave of reports surfaced. Investigators, many of them from independent news groups, began publishing evidence showing that the controversial proposal had been planned for months. Files revealed quiet meetings, hidden discussions, and attempts to pressure certain worlds into supporting the plan. None of these documents were meant to be public. The most surprising part was that several smaller species had been discouraged from attending the peace talks at all. They had been told their presence wasn't necessary. In reality, their presence might have added more support for the humans. When these details became known, the public reaction intensified. Citizens across multiple planets demanded answers. Many felt the council had crossed a line, and they were tired of pretending it hadn't happened. Meanwhile, the humans stayed silent. Not silent in fear, silent by choice. While the council tried to repair its image through long announcements and carefully crafted speeches, the humans didn't respond with counter-statements or defensive explanations. Their silence made the council look even more guilty. Everywhere the humans went, their quiet departure became a symbol. It wasn't the withdrawal itself that shocked people. It was the manner in which it happened. Calm, dignified, without threats, without shouting. It said more than any aggressive reaction could have. Other delegations who had been in the chamber began speaking with each other privately. Some admitted they had felt uncomfortable during the meeting. Others said they had noticed the hidden pressure, but didn't know how to react. A few confessed that they almost stood up with the humans, but didn't have the courage. In the weeks following the withdrawal, diplomatic channels across the galaxy experienced an unusual shift. Dozens of worlds reached out to humans quietly, some sending encrypted messages, others sending representatives directly to Earth's diplomatic offices. They wanted to know what happened. They wanted to know if humans planned to return. Some simply wanted reassurance that Earth still believed in cooperation. Humans responded patiently, answering questions without attacking the council. Their calm explanations only strengthened their reputation. They explained that they didn't walk away to cause conflict. They walked away to protect fairness. That message echoed deeply across societies that had long felt unheard. While this was happening, tensions inside the council headquarters grew. Members who had supported the proposal started distancing themselves from it, claiming they had been misled or pressured. Others worried that their planets would question their loyalty. For the first time in decades, the council was facing open criticism from multiple sides at once. In a quiet conference room far from the main chamber, A small group of council members held a private meeting. They discussed the possibility that the humans might not return, not just to this session, but to future negotiations entirely. That idea scared them more than they expected. The council had always relied on human cooperation to maintain balance. Without humans at the table, everything felt uncertain. Back on Earth, the atmosphere was noticeably colder. The human delegation returned home without fanfare, without media celebrations, and without speeches. Their goal was not to appear as heroes. They simply wanted to regroup. They shared what had happened with global leaders, who listened carefully, then began forming a plan. Earth didn't rush into decisions. They didn't issue public warnings or threats. They focused on strengthening internal relationships with their own colonies and with independent worlds outside the Council's control. Many of those worlds, impressed by humanity's quiet firmness, approached Earth with new offers of cooperation. This unexpected rise in support increased the Council's worries. If humans built their own network of allies separate from the Council's influence, the balance of power could shift dramatically. And not through conflict, through trust. Trust is a stronger force than fear, something the Council was only now beginning to understand. One event, in particular, pushed the situation further. A well-known representative from a mid-sized world gave a public speech criticizing the Council, stating that if humans, one of the most diplomatic species, felt cornered, then the Council must have gone too far. The speech spread rapidly across networks, becoming one of the most shared messages of the year. People everywhere were talking about the same thing. Why did the Council push humans so hard? What were they trying to hide? If they could do this to Earth, what could they do to smaller worlds? The Council tried to respond by releasing official statements, but the messages were filled with overly formal language and didn't convince anyone. They sounded defensive, rehearsed, and worried. Meanwhile, the humans released nothing. Their silence carried more influence than the Council's loud explanations. Slowly, something even more surprising began to happen. Several member worlds started asking for reforms. Some demanded greater transparency in future proposals. Others wanted to remove certain individuals from leadership positions. A few even suggested forming a new committee to monitor Council decisions. These were ideas no one would have dared to speak aloud before the humans walked out. But now, with the image of those empty chairs still fresh in everyone's mind, the galaxy had reached a point where pretending was no longer possible. The Council could no longer hide behind tradition or authority. Their actions were being questioned openly, their decisions re-examined, and their influence challenged. The humans didn't cause this shift. They simply exposed it. By choosing principle over pressure, they reminded the galaxy of something many had forgotten. Fairness matters. And once that reminder spreads, it becomes almost impossible to ignore. The calm withdrawal had become a turning point, not just for Earth, not just for the Council, but for the entire galaxy. And the Council, whether it admitted it or not, was beginning to understand that they were facing the consequences of their own choices, not the humans. When the Council finally realized how far the situation had spread, it was already too late. The message of the humans' withdrawal had traveled across every major route, reached every news stream, and entered conversations from small markets to grand academies. People did not just talk about what happened. They analyzed it, questioned it, and connected it with past decisions that had never made sense before. Inside the Council headquarters, frustration grew like a quiet storm that refused to pass. Older members insisted the humans had overreacted. Younger members believed the Council had pushed too far. Some didn't say anything at all, afraid to be blamed for a situation that had clearly slipped out of control. Even the speaker, who normally carried himself with polished confidence, now walked with a stiffness that showed he felt the weight of the moment. Every morning, he received stacks of messages from different worlds, many expressing concern, some demanding explanations. And the ones that bothered him the most were the polite, short messages from Earth. They weren't angry. They weren't defensive. They simply repeated the same calm point. Earth would not return to any talks unless transparency was restored. Somehow, that calmness felt sharper than any criticism. Even more troubling was the way the public reacted. On many planets, groups gathered at community centers to discuss the situation. People sat in circles, shared their thoughts, and compared their own experiences with the Council's decisions over the years. What began as quiet discussions soon became something bigger. A shared realization that the Council had long been making choices without real consultation. Some said the humans had done something brave by walking away. Others said the humans had simply done what everyone else wished they could do. And many wondered why a council built to protect fairness would hide something as important as the oversight proposal. Slowly, the galaxy was waking up, and the council could feel it. A private meeting was called, one that included only the highest-ranking voices. They sat around a large circular table, each one attempting to appear calm, though their faces betrayed their uneasiness. The room felt colder than usual. There was no small talk, no light chatter, just a heavy silence waiting to be broken. The speaker began the meeting by insisting that the council must not appear weak. He argued that if they allowed one withdrawal to disrupt the entire system, other worlds might start challenging them as well. His voice was steady, but those who knew him well could hear the fear behind the firmness. But this time, the other members didn't simply nod along. A representative from a distant agricultural world raised a quiet but firm question. Why was the proposal introduced without informing the humans in advance? Another representative, known for rarely speaking, asked how such an important decision could be pushed through a process that skipped standard review steps. A third representative pointed out that the evidence now circulating online made it clear that the proposal had been prepared months before the talks. If that was true, then the council had not only broken trust with the humans, it had broken trust with everyone. For the first time in a long while, the speaker found himself surrounded by people who were no longer willing to accept vague explanations. Tried to defend the decision, suggesting it was meant to ensure stability in regions growing too quickly. But the moment he said those words, several members exchanged glances, silent signs that they were no longer convinced by his reasoning. The meeting continued for hours. Voices stayed calm, but the tension never left. It was becoming clear that the council was struggling with more than a diplomatic problem. They were facing a crisis of credibility, and everyone in the room felt the weight of it. Meanwhile, far from the political halls, everyday people were making their own choices. On multiple worlds, groups of citizens began forming informal councils. Of their own, not to challenge the main council, but to discuss how decisions affected their lives. Some worlds reached out to Earth for guidance, not because they wanted to join humans, but because they admired how humans handled themselves. The humans became an example of calm strength, not because they sought to be, but because they walked away without shouting. Back on Earth, the atmosphere was different, quiet, steady, and focused. The human delegation had returned to their main command center, a place filled with bright screens, smooth walls, and long tables used for global discussions. But even here, no one rushed. They spent their days examining reports, responding to messages from other worlds, and reviewing the Council's past decisions with patient detail. Earth's leaders wanted to fully understand the implications of the Council's proposal, not because they feared it, but because they wanted to make sure any future engagement would be built on clarity. The humans believed deeply in cooperation, but they also believed that cooperation must be based on honesty. One evening, long after most of the building had grown quiet, the envoy who had spoken at the council walked into a room filled with large screens displaying star maps. It was a place he often visited when he needed to think. He stood alone for a few minutes, studying the glowing markers that represented human colonies, allies, and unknown territories. A young advisor entered behind him, carrying a small tablet. She didn't speak at first, sensing he was deep in thought. After a moment, she shared the latest update. Several smaller worlds wanted to host their own peace discussions without the Council. They wanted humans present as neutral participants, believing humans would treat them with fairness. The envoy listened with a quiet expression. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. To him, this wasn't a victory. It was a responsibility one. Earth had to carry carefully. He asked her what the people on those worlds were saying. She replied that many felt more hopeful now, not because they wanted conflict, but because they wanted their voices to matter. That answer stayed with him long. After she left, across the galaxy, the Council watched these developments closely. Some members feared the creation of new alliances. Others worried about losing influence. But the most thoughtful among them realized something more important. The galaxy wasn't turning against the Council. It was turning toward fairness, something. The Council had forgotten to prioritize Dot as pressure grew. The Council arranged another internal meeting, this one even more urgent than the last. They needed a solution one that calmed the galaxy, restored their reputation, and brought humans back to the table. Several ideas were suggested. One member proposed rewriting the proposal entirely. Another suggested offering humans a formal apology. A third argued that the real problem wasn't the proposal itself, but the secrecy surrounding it. The speaker resisted at first, insisting that showing weakness would harm the Council's authority. But the others pushed back. They reminded him that authority was not the same as respect. And right now, the Council was losing respect faster than they could control. Finally, after hours of quiet debates, they reached a difficult decision. The Council would acknowledge the mistake publicly. It wasn't an easy choice. Some members feared the reaction. Some worried about their reputations. But they also knew that pretending nothing had happened would only make things worse. As they prepared the announcement, the speaker read through the final draft slowly. The words felt heavy, but necessary. The Council would admit that the proposal had been introduced improperly. They would acknowledge the lack of transparency, and they would invite the human delegation back, not to continue the same talks, but to rebuild trust from the beginning. It was a step they should have taken earlier, but at least they were taking it now. When the announcement was finally released across the galaxy, reactions were immediate. Some people were surprised. Others felt relieved. Many believed this was the first honest thing the Council had done in years. But the entire galaxy cared about only one question. Would the humans return? On Earth, the envoy read the Council's message carefully. His team gathered around him, studying every line. The Council's tone was different, less forceful, more sincere. They weren't demanding. They weren't rushing. They weren't pretending. They were admitting their mistake. For a long time, the envoy said nothing. He simply watched the message replay on the screen. Then, in a calm voice, he said that Earth would respond soon, but only after discussing the matter with global leaders. The galaxy waited. Worlds paused. News channels replayed the announcement repeatedly. The humans were quiet once again, but this time, their silence didn't feel like distance. It felt like the calm before a decision that could reshape everything. When the humans left the peace talks, the entire galaxy reacted as if someone had pulled the floor out from under a huge building. Every Council member knew this wasn't a small issue they could hide under long speeches or complicated rules. It was a disaster they created themselves. And now they had to deal with the consequences. For days, messages poured into the Council hall from different star systems. Some were confused, some were angry. Some simply wanted to know why the humans, a species known for patience and fairness, had walked out without even raising their voices. That silence had bothered everyone more than any threat could. Silence meant disappointment. Silence meant they had been pushed too far. And silence meant they would not return easily. Inside the council hall, the atmosphere had changed completely. The room that once buzzed with pride and confidence now felt cold and uneasy. The decorative lights that made the chamber look grand seemed dimmer. Representatives did not speak loudly anymore. They whispered, as if even the walls might judge them. The Speaker of the Council, who once carried himself with strong confidence, now sat with tired eyes. He had never expected things to fall apart like this. He thought humans would eventually accept whatever terms were pushed on them. He believed they would try to avoid conflict at any cost. But he had forgotten something important humans respected. Peace, yes, but they respected fairness even more. When fairness was gone, so was their reason to stay. After several long meetings, where nothing was achieved except admitting mistakes, the speaker realized something. The galaxy did not fear humans. The galaxy trusted humans. And losing the trust of such a species was far worse than facing their strength. So the council made a choice it had never made before. They decided to publicly accept responsibility. They would call an emergency broadcast and speak directly to billions of lives across thousands of systems. They would admit their mistake without hiding behind fancy words. And they would hope humans were listening. On the day of the announcement, the council hall was filled completely. Even representatives who usually showed up late were already seated, staring ahead with serious expressions. The speaker stood at the center, the same spot where humans had once stood while trying to defend their values. He remembered the look on the face of the human envoy, calm, disappointed, but strong. That memory stayed in his mind as he prepared to speak. The broadcast began with a simple message flashing across screens in every major system. Official statement from the Galaxy Council. People, creatures, artificial minds, everyone who lived under the Council's rule waited. Some expected excuses. Some expected blame. But what they heard surprised them. The speaker's voice was steady, but it carried a weight that showed he understood the seriousness of the moment. He spoke slowly, directly, and without trying to decorate the truth. "We made a mistake," he said. "We failed to give the humans the honesty and fairness they deserved. We allowed fear of their abilities to cloud our judgment. We attempted to push them into agreements that were not built on trust, and in doing so, we betrayed the very purpose of this council." Shock spread across the chamber. A few representatives lowered their heads. Some looked away. On distant worlds, people paused whatever they were doing to listen more carefully. The speaker continued. Humanity did not walk away because they wished to create division. They walked away because we did not treat them as equals. And for that, the responsibility is ours. We offer our apology not out of pressure, but out of understanding. The words echoed. It was the first time the Galaxy Council had apologized to a single species in such a direct, public manner. A historic moment. A humbling one, but the Council did not stop there. "We hope humanity will someday return to the discussion table," the speaker said. "Not as a species to be managed, but as a partner whose voice matters. Until then, we will take the time to reflect and rebuild our values." When the broadcast ended, silence spread throughout the hall. And then, slowly, something unexpected happened. Representatives from a dozen different species stood up and walked toward the center. They placed symbols, small tokens of respect, on the platform gestures to show they supported the apology. It did not fix everything, but it was a start. Meanwhile, on Earth, the message reached the humans clearly. The envoy who had once stood in the council chamber defending honesty watched the broadcast from a quiet meeting room back home. Alongside him were scientists, advisors, and leaders from different colonies. No one spoke while the council apologized. They simply listened, every word sinking in. When the transmission ended, a soft silence filled the room. Someone finally said, "Well, they did it." The envoy gave a small nod. "It takes strength to admit fault," he replied, "especially at that level." But even then, no one suggested rushing back to the council. They knew respect could not be restored in a single moment. They needed time. And they believed the council did too. In the following days, messages came from across the galaxy: ordinary citizens, traders, explorers, researchers, people who admired the humans for standing up without causing chaos. Many said the same thing. "You reminded us that fairness should never be ignored." These messages did something unexpected. They strengthened humanity's image not as a threat, not as an unstoppable force, but as a species that valued justice deeply. Neutral systems began reaching out, wanting new diplomatic ties. Some saw humanity as a safer partner than the council. Others simply wanted to understand the humans better. And while the humans appreciated this support, they remained calm and careful. They weren't trying to build a new power structure. They weren't trying to replace the council. They simply wanted meaningful connections, built step by step. Meanwhile, the council began repairing the damage from within. They reviewed old rules, removed unfair clauses, and improved transparency. For the first time in decades, ordinary representatives had a real say. And slowly, the fear once associated with humanity turned into respect that it wasn't a perfect galaxy. Problems still existed. Misunderstandings still happened. But a new tone was born, one where honesty mattered, where no species felt small under the council's shadow, and where cooperation was finally more important than control. Weeks later, a small message arrived on Earth from the council. It was short, simple, and written without any formality. "When you are ready to return, the seat you once held remains yours." The humans read it, smiled calmly, and kept the message safe. They didn't rush to reply. They didn't feel pressured to act quickly. They just appreciated the sincerity behind it. And so, the galaxy entered a new phase one, shaped not by force, fear, or hidden agendas, but by the quiet power of a decision made by a group of human envoys who refused to accept unfairness. Withdrawal became a symbol, a reminder that even in a universe filled with powerful governments and ancient traditions, real change could begin with something as simple as standing up, walking away, and refusing to compromise on truth. The council had made its mistake, but by admitting it publicly, by learning from it, and by choosing a more honest path forward, it turned a moment of crisis into a chance for renewal. And the humans? They continued doing what they always did, walking a path built on integrity, earning respect not through strength, but through the choices that defined them.